In a roughly 2-hour-long address given earlier this week to the Palestinian National Council, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas gave an alarming so-called history lesson in which he blamed Jews for causing the Holocaust and their own genocide in World War II. Joining me now with the implications of his speech is attorney, public diplomacy expert, and lecturer Bar-Yoshafat. Thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here.
All right, so what are your initial thoughts and reactions to Abbas's statements here?
Okay, well, first of all, I wasn't really surprised. We have to remember that just last year, Abbas said that Israel is poisoning water wells of the Palestinians because of orders from the rabbis. He referred to the U.S. ambassador as a son of a dog, not a different American phrase, because it's part of the conception that Jews are descendants of apes and pigs and dogs. So the concept of the PA, the Palestinian Authority, being very anti-Semitic is not a new concept. What I think is very unique is the fact that right now the magnifying glass is on them and not on Israel. But I want to say one more thing about this, this concept of them being anti-Semitic. The biggest test for me is the fact that right now, every year, the Palestinian Authority is paying hundreds of millions of dollars to terrorists. It means it's actually more beneficial for you to conduct an act of terror. You get about 5 times more than the average wage if you commit an act of terror. That, for me, is the biggest sign of anti-Semitism.
Well, yeah, and we saw the Taylor Force Act, recently passed in the States. So how do these, let's just kind of talk about what this means for peace more specifically. How do these statements reflect on Abbas as a partner in peace? I mean, is he a partner in peace here?
Well, it's a matter of opinion. In my opinion, the answer is obviously no. He was never a partner of peace. I would even argue to say that he doesn't really have a narrative. He just has a negative. That's why he's always trying to undermine the connection between the Jews and the land of Israel. He's trying to basically take our identity and copy-paste it to his identity. So we cannot have peace with a person that's inciting for terror, indoctrinating children to hate Jews in his schools. That's not a sign of a peace partner.
Well, I mean, Abbas has a long history of Holocaust denial going all the way back to his degree from Moscow and his dissertation. Yeah, his dissertation called The Secret Relationship Between Nazism and Zionism. But there are some people who say that this rhetoric is just meant to please his base and that we shouldn't take it seriously.
It's a very good argument, but the problem is don't just hear what he says in English, also see where he gives his money to. Now, if he will also have a change of policy, maybe he also had a change of heart. I find it very difficult to believe because, again, incitement in schools, giving money to terrorists, naming streets and town squares after terrorists who committed suicide bombing attacks, that's not a sign of a peace partner. That's a sign of someone who has no recognition of Israel. Furthermore, he wants to establish a state, but he's calling for all of the Arabs in the world to come to where? Israel proper, not what he wants to be a future Palestinian state, which is very odd because if you're going to create a state, I would assume you want your people to come to your state and not to someone else's state.
Well, going back to the Palestinian National Council, the PNC, some expect Abbas to be either excluding political opponents from the convention so that he can obviously shore up his own supporters in power, or that perhaps he's, maybe making one of his loyalists poised to replace him at the right time. He is in his 80s, of course. What's going on here? What is most likely to happen?
Well, in the broader picture, I think we have to remember that right now the world seems to be a little bit more pro-Israel, especially with the current U.S. administration, which seems to be leaning more towards Israel. And Abbas cannot seem to be moderate right now. He's fighting over who is going to be the head of the resistance, the rebellion that they're trying to have. So if he will seem too moderate, it's not going to work. Also, they have an inner conflict, of course, between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. And again, there's a big question, who's going to be the person who's going to rule this entity?
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us and giving us your insight on this topic.
Thank you for having me.